I'm Jada Franson, and this is my weekly roundup. I would be the first to admit that I am terrible at maths, but this, coming originally from a Washington Post contributor, then peddled by a member of the New York Times editorial board, whilst live on air with an MSNBC reporter, is actually shocking.
But you see it as a possibility if he wants to spend $1 billion beating this guy, he could do it.
Absolutely. Somebody tweeted recently that actually with the money he spent, he could have given every American $1 million.
I've got it. Let's put it up on the screen. When I read it tonight on social media, it kind of all became clear. Bloomberg spent $500 million on ads. U.S. population, 327 million. Don't tell us if you're ahead of us on the math. He could have given each American $1 million and have had lunch money left over. It's an incredible way of putting it.
It's an incredible way of putting it. It's true. It's disturbing. It does suggest, what we're talking about here, which is there's too much money in politics.
What's initially worrying about this is that no one involved spotted the mistake. The tweet was captured, cropped and shared live on air without anyone spotting the mathematical error, which happens to be by a margin of $999,998.48 per person. But that's not even the most sinister element. See, we all know the left like to peddle crazy narratives to suit their agendas. Basic maths was obviously not present when they calculated the number of genders there are, for example. But it's these calculations that would account for all of the free stuff Americans will definitely receive under a socialist president. Because 1 + 1 equals everything that everyone needs, with plenty to spare for anyone else who might want to enter the country to lap up all the freeness. If it weren't for the fact that the education system has been hijacked by these insane socialists, I'd suggest the loony left go back to school. But the reality is fundamental teachings like basic maths are being replaced by gender studies, diversity training, and sex education for minors. How anyone takes these people seriously is beyond me. The Office for National Statistics has released figures showing that almost a quarter of pregnancies in England and Wales are aborted. As a pro-life activist, I've been watching these figures for many years, but every time I say the words out loud, I'm actually in disbelief myself. 24% of expectant mothers had a termination in England and Wales in 2018. That's 1 in 4 pregnant women making the decision to kill their own child. The brutal reality is that following the legalisation of abortion under the 1967 Abortion Act, the senseless destruction of these tiny, defenceless human beings has become normalised. Abortion is literally being used as a method of birth control by thousands of women across the UK. There were 205,295 abortions carried out in England and Wales in 2018. Almost a quarter of pregnant mothers chose to end their pregnancy by ending their child's life. These figures are at a record high. At the same time, the conception rate fell to its lowest level since 2004. This is a national crisis. These statistics are not a coincidence. Women and girls in the UK are subjected to anti-family rhetoric right from early education. Traditional values have been so eroded that women are now seeing murdering a baby as an acceptable solution to an inconvenient situation. Conception rates are plummeting because women are buying into this propaganda that marriage and children are somehow oppressive. This is backed up by the latest stats which show that a record number of women are now working full-time. These figures also show that for the 3rd year in a row, the only group to see an increase in conception was women aged 40 and over, as prospective mothers delayed childbearing. Young women are actively being discouraged from marrying young and having a family. Instead, they're being told they should have a career and not have the burden of having a husband and children to care for. This is nothing short of indoctrination. But whilst it's one thing to convince a woman that she should stay single and put herself first until she hits 40, it's quite another to convince her that killing her own baby, which is growing inside her, is an acceptable thing to do. Abortion is murder. There's no other way to describe the taking of a human life. If a mother was walking down the street with her child and someone killed the child in front of her, it would be murder. The fact that the mother orders the murder to be carried out whilst the child is in her womb does not negate the fact that the killing of the child is murder. Such was the fate of 24% of babies in England and Wales. aborting almost a quarter of the nation's unborn children is genocide. Did you know that anything white is racist? Well, you do now.
My final question is to you, Minister. My Comcar driver told me the other day that the colour of the cars was chosen by you personally. Is that a true rumour that it's circulating?
I take responsibility for that, yes. I think that it's my judgment. The white colour, sort of in my mind, reflects a bit of a colonial past that we've moved on from, and I think the colour chosen for the Comcars is a better reflection of a modern, forward-looking Australia.
My driver was complaining very hard to keep them looking clean.
Yes, that was Australia's Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann, saying he intervened in the changing of the colour of the cars that ferry around government ministers. Apparently, white-coloured cars reflect the colonial past. There are many fundamental principles that make this decision a terrible one, like the cost to the Australian taxpayer for essentially upgrading ministers' cars from a $60,000 model to $120,000 plus BMW. That's got to be a slap in the face to those who have lost everything they have ever owned in the recent fires and are now covering the cost of a luxury vehicle for the very people that are supposed to work for them. And unlike here in Britain, there is the more practical element of the white reflecting heat and therefore being a much more sensible choice of colour. But all that aside, seriously? White cars are racist now? So white reflects a colonial past, therefore the most appropriate shade to represent a modern Australia is dark grey. It just gets more and more ridiculous. I would have been less surprised if he'd suggested a rainbow car like the pro-LGBT police force in England roll around in. In fact, on the subject of England, it was back in 2014 that an Englishman who was flying the St George's Cross for the World Cup tournament had his home photographed and tweeted by Labour MP Emily Thornberry. Out of pure snobbery, she tweeted the image as if the sight of an England flag in England should somehow be offensive. But look what colour his van is. White van, national flag, must be a racist, according to Liberal lunatics. After significant backlash, Cormann went on to say, "It was a clumsy attempt at a light-hearted comment which I regret." Bullshit. This is what happens when Liberals feel so comfortable in their virtue signalling that they come out with statements for which they should realistically be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. Turkey have sent a sea of immigrants to the Greek border. Hordes of predominantly fighting-fit aged men are flooding towards Greece by land and sea. After firing warning shots, Greek border guards had to use tear gas and the military were used to block the influx of literally millions of illegal immigrant men. Boatloads of invaders were pushed back by the Greek Coast Guard in an attempt to halt the illegal penetration of their borders. But none of this should come as a surprise, not least because Turkish President Erdogan warned Europe that he would send 3.6 million migrants our way, but because this supports the very principle that he and almost every single one of those millions of men support: jihad. The fundamental requirement of every Muslim is to wage jihad and establish Islam as the only religion throughout the entire world. This invasion is a form of jihad. We, the people of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and indeed the Republic of Ireland, have the advantage of being islands, not landlocked nations on the continent of Europe, but that won't stop these boys. And it hasn't stopped entire British towns being colonised into no-go zones. Just like Greece, we and all European nations need to protect our borders by any means necessary. If we allow this invasion to happen, we will very shortly have no nation left to defend.
Ey Avrupa Birliği! Kendinize gelin. Bak yine söylüyorum. Bizim şu andaki operasyonumuzu bir işgal hareketi diye nitelendirmeye çalışırsanız işimiz kolay. Kapıları açarız. 3,6 milyon mülteciyi sizlere göndeririz.
Those who are saying that if they were attacked they would answer aggressively, well, obviously it's very clear that they have never gotten an Ottoman slap in their life.